Before we get into materials, I want to just go over a couple of things about shadows. And in order to do that, I'm going to actually drop a plane in so that we have a kind of ground that we can really see what these shadows are doing. Let me go ahead and increase the scale of this plane. And I'll also move it down a little bit. That should be good. And let's render this now. Now you can really see how these lights are creating shadows. We had a little bit of a shadow on this from this cube onto this cone. I moved it a bit. But now you can see how these lights are casting shadows and that the shadows are pretty harsh. We also have that this torus is creating shadows even though it's no longer visible in the scene. And so that's kind of a problem. So these are things that we'll also maybe want to adjust. And we're going to be adjusting these within the lights themselves. So I have this point light here. And a really great way to turn this light on and off, I can say illuminates by default and turn it off, or I can go to my channel box editor and turn it off here. Let me go ahead and save this image. And let's render this without that point light being turned on so we can see exactly what that point light is responsible for. And again, it was that pink hue, and it really was responsible for most of the shadows, or a lot of the shadows. We still have some shadows. But I think we will start with that point light and adjusting its parameters so we can see how those shadows are interacting. And you can already see as I'm rendering this image that it's taking quite a bit longer than the 5 seconds that our black scene took. That this is now taking, very hard to see, but 30 seconds to render this particular scene for one frame. So we want to keep this in mind when we're using Arnold. There's some soft shadows happening here, but I'm going to go ahead and turn back on this point light by hitting 1 on the visibility here in my channel box editor. I'll go back to my attributes. Let me let this render again one more time with that light turned on. And once this is complete, we can adjust some of the settings for these shadows to maybe give a softer look. And so in my attribute editor for this light, I already changed the color. I increased the intensity and I put the decay rate as cubic. If the decay rate was linear or no decay, I would not have to have such an intense light. But this is my preference. You can play around with these settings. Just know that they correlate to each other within Arnold. And if I go down to shadows, or I go down to Arnold, because I'm rendering in Arnold, and the way to adjust, so it's not going to be any of these shadow options that you see here, but the way to change the appearance of the shadow is to increase the radius here. And now let's render this and see what it looks like. So now that light has created a much softer appearance of shadows. We still have, because we have a number of lights in our scene, perhaps it's the direction light. I believe it is the directional light, might be the spotlight, which is causing a kind of harder shadow. But we see here with the light, with the point light, that we have a much softer shadow now just by increasing the radius under the Arnold tab within the point light settings. And I think this just is more appealing to me, but again, this is all about taste. It's about aesthetics and what you would like your images to look like. I'm going to go to my directional light here, and these again are settings that are going to be under the Arnold tab. And here I'm going to increase the angle a little bit and then render it again and see if that's responsible for these shadows. Let me take a snapshot of this or save that image. Let's render it again. And it must be the spotlight that is responsible for these shadows. So once this is done rendering, I don't see any shadows that are necessarily being caused by that directional light. But let's see if I take an image of this and compare it to the last one, if there's been any change in our render. I think it would be important to list out or list in your comments for this the couple image renders that you are going to be creating and submitting to tell us what some of these settings you've adjusted as well. So let's see if there's been any change. You can see a very big change between these two, right? When I adjusted that angle for the point light, the direction light isn't casting any shadows onto our scene, but the spotlight certainly is. And again, under spotlight here, and I can go down to the Arnold tab and then adjust the radius. So even if I give it 0.2, we can render just this one little section and see a difference. A little bit softer. I might bump it up a bit more. Or perhaps it's not the spotlight, but instead this light, which is casting that shadow. So I'll go to that shadow, that light here, and I have shadow density, visibility. Let's see how I can adjust. And let's even see if this is the light that is causing those shadows to appear. No, it's a different light. Let's turn off our spotlight. Let's turn off our direction light and identify where that shadow is coming from. It is the directional light. Okay, well that's good to know. Now we can see what this looks like without both of those lights on. Turn these back on. And in case you were wondering, that mesh light that I created is, and this is something we haven't talked about yet, it's a child of this object. And it's embedded here. So we have this torus, which is the mesh itself in our outliner, and then I have this little plus here, and now it's saying that I have that torus, which is that mesh, but I also have this light that's attached to it that's a child of it. So it means that it's tied to its parent in a way that we can go into a little bit later. So it was the directional light, correct, that I want to maybe make an adjustment to. Let's go back here, and again, under Arnold, increase the angle. Let's increase it by a lot and see if that changes or enough. And that has. That certainly affected the appearance of those shadows. To be much softer, I just need to increase that angle quite a bit more. So we can see quite a bit of a difference between having no angle and very hard shadows to adjusting under the Arnold tab, either angle or radius for the way that those shadows appear, the way they're calculated by the renderer.